So drums, all MIDI. There are no audio drum tracks. It's just 100% MIDI. Most of the drum programming is just essentially what Justin sent me with the project. I probably made some tweaks here and there on certain songs, maybe adjusted some kick velocities. As we changed a few kick patterns. I know these are some of the benefits of just having MIDI drums in general. Things stay so malleable all the way to the end. I probably adjusted some hi-hat stuff, just like as we're sculpting the mix, I'm constantly tweaking MIDI to make things a little bit more realistic. But the fact that I'm starting with programmed drums and the cymbals are as detailed as they are kind of meant that at least for the overheads, I had to stick with Superior Drummer, which is what Justin used. Shells sort of can translate between like whatever library you want to use. Cymbals, not so much. There's not even like a unified way that they handle things like hi-hat pedal position and ride bells versus, the bow, I believe. I learned that it's called the bow of the ride. It would take a lot of work to even get that stuff to translate, and it would just never sound as intended. And there's a lot of detailed cymbal stuff, hi-hat work on this record. So I just made the call, okay, so no matter what, cymbals are going to be Superior Drummer 3. Superior Drummer 3 is a huge library of sounds, so I can still pick from all those options, which I did. I don't have all of it. You can see it's just cymbals. I've just disabled all the shells. This is essentially the layout that he programmed with. 3 crashes, 2 Chinas, maybe not. I don't even know if all of this is in place, but I kind of had to stick with that too, unless we're going to go in and rewrite the drums, which I didn't want to do. But I could go and just sort of pick and choose my cymbals out of the libraries I had available, which is, I think all I really have is the standard library and then the Death and Darkness pack. I just went through each cymbal and just kind of picked the one I wanted from all the available options for that size cymbal and type of cymbal, and then sort of balance all those together. So it's like a mix of multiple different packs here. Pretty cohesive to me, despite the fact that they're not all from the same library. So there you go. There's the cymbals. I did split the MIDI. I didn't probably really need to. And then all of the shells for what I'm considering the natural drum kit are going to Krimh drums. I did try to see if I could get the cymbals working here, and honestly, I liked the way they sounded better. It just wasn't going to translate for all the reasons I just went over. But shells do, and man, this library just sounds amazing. Really love these sounds. Always loved this drum sounds in particular. They have so much cool space. I love the way his room interacts with the shells. I love the way he tunes drums. So kind of a no-brainer to use these as what is replacing a natural kit for me. I think I did. Amazing library, and it worked really well combining these two. We'll get into the routing in a second here. So then those two libraries together sort of replace what I would have in a real drum recording. The way I handle my routing, the way my tracks and groups are set up is the same as if I had real recorded drums. And then on top of these two libraries, I did what I would normally do, and I augment kick and snare samples with my own samples, just using trigger. Just like a giant mix mash of kick samples here. It sounds really good, honestly. Love the way that sounds. I need to save this as a preset and reuse it. The two MIDI libraries are replacing my natural drum kit, and then I'm stacking samples on top of it. That's kind of how I figured out where I would be most comfortable in my mix process, is just to replace what I would normally have with a natural drum kit, and then augment like I normally would a real drum kit with my own samples. Kick and snare samples, those are the ones I've augmented separately. All the tracks that start with BD are Bogren digital, and then SD3 is obviously Superior Drummer 3. And they're all routed to my kind of typical allotment of drum groups. Kick mics, in this case, is actually the Krimh kicks on one fader. Kick samples, which are my augmented samples coming through trigger. Then those feed a master kick bus. Same thing with the snare, mics and sample. The mics would be the Krimh snare. Samples are my samples. Master snare. Toms are just all the Krimh toms. Main overheads, so now we're into the Superior Drummer 3. So main overheads, close overheads. This is, again, how I would separate a typical kit. So my left and right overhead are going to go to my main overhead group, and then close overheads would be close mics, splashes, chinas, hi-hats, rides, that sort of thing. Then all those feed one overhead group. Actually, in this overhead group, we're getting both overheads from Superior Drummer 3 and the overhead tracks from the Krimh library. Those kind of gel together in one pretend overhead. Even though they come in on separate tracks, I'm treating them together in one bus, and then same with the room. So the room is seeing primarily room from the shells, and then a little bit of room from only the overhead and cymbals and Superior Drummer 3. That was one of the coolest things, is because everyone knows like room mics can make your shells sound incredible, but you're always sort of held back by the amount of cymbal bleed in those rooms. You can't really crush things as much as you want. You're going to have to pull some high end out, or the cymbals are just going to like destroy everything in the room mics, where having the room from the shells and the room from the overheads on separate individual tracks lets me dial that in just how I want. So there are truly some benefits to having MIDI drums as well. If you've seen some of my other recent Nail the Mixes, you recognize this combo that I'm just kind of stuck with now. It's 2 hardware compressors, a Compex and a decomp, and then I'm using this sweet Devil Lock here also, like 3 separate parallel compressors for drums that I'm feeding independently using sends, so we'll get into that. But those are going to stay active, so you're also hearing their impact on the sound as well.
You were able to separate shell bleed from overhead thanks to programmed drums. How did that change your approach for mixing them?
I kind of like to crush my rooms a pretty good amount. In fact, just so we can just start hearing some audio, let's just see what the room sounds like right now. This is like mostly a finished mix. So it's actually not too smacked, but we got some of the good old standby talkback limiter on there. Corn F talkback limiter, amazing crusher for drum rooms. A typical, like a real live room would have more cymbal bleed there. So I was able to like dial this in exactly the amount of compression, saturation, EQ I wanted, mostly trying to get what I wanted out of the shells, and then blend those overheads in for taste, just for that cohesiveness. What I really love about that room mic sound is more to do with the shells, and like having those 2 separate obviously is like really cool. I try not to like, I don't want to go so overboard, because then when we start getting into realms that may sound unnatural, because it's not really possible unless you're doing like the weird thing where you're like recording shells and cymbals separately, which like just honestly never made a ton of sense to me. I didn't try to like go overboard by just like completely removing the overheads from the room, but you have more flexibility there to get what you need out of the room mics on the parts of the kit that you want it to be applying to.